Millionaire changes the life of a widowed bricklayer. He made us cry. If real stories touch you, if you believe that a gesture can change everything, then like us now and subscribe to the channel. Because what you're going to hear here isn't just about changing lives. It's about dignity, pain, hope, and humanity. Stay with us until the end, because this story will touch your heart in a way you don't expect. Jose was known in the neighborhood as the man who never said no to work. He was a bricklayer, a widower, the father of 2 young children, and hadn't taken a day off since his wife left 3 years ago. He worked with his hands, but he supported the house with his heart. The loss of his wife didn't just come as pain. It also brought double responsibilities. The food that was missing, the clothes that needed to be washed, the school notebook that he barely knew how to fill. But he carried on, always in silence, always with his eyes on the ground and his head full. That morning he was called to work in a different place. A neighborhood where the streets were quiet, the houses surrounded by high walls and wide windows. The kind of place Jose never imagined entering except to work. He arrived with his wheelbarrow, his tools tied together with a piece of old rope. His shirt was stained with paint, the calluses on his hands were visible. He greeted the doorman with a shy nod. He received simple instructions. He was just to fix the floor in the backyard. Just another ordinary day, he thought. As he began his work, he didn't notice someone watching him from one of the upstairs windows. The owner of the house, a successful businessman, watched everything in silence. It wasn't Jose's strength that drew attention. It was the way he did everything carefully, with respect, as if that floor belonged to his own home. At noon, Jose walked away a little and sat in the corner of the garden. He opened a simple lunchbox with rice and egg. The boss, curious, decided to come down. Without warning, he left the room and went to the backyard. He sat down next to Jose, still in his suit, on the floor and asked, "How long has it been since you stopped to breathe?" Jose wasn't expecting that question. He didn't even know how to answer, but he was sincere. He said that since he lost his wife, there was no more time to breathe. Every day was a struggle. Rent, the children's school, bills, the fear of getting sick. It was like living on the edge. The businessman listened, without interrupting, without judging, and at that moment something happened. A connection that transcended social classes or life stories. It was as if they recognized the truth in each other. The tiredness, the courage, the weight of living. Before leaving, Jose received an envelope. He had no money. He had an invitation. A dinner at that house with his children. Jose found it strange. He thought something was wrong. But out of respect he accepted. That night, Jose put on the best shirt he had. His children put on clean sneakers and fixed their hair with water. They went to the house. And they were welcomed as guests, not as employees. They sat at the table. They ate together. They spoke little. But a lot was said in their eyes. The businessman made no promises. But at that table, under the yellow light and the silent presence of empathy, something was born. Plan. An idea. Purpose. Jose's story, until then marked by losses, began to take another direction. That dinner was the beginning of a change that no one there expected, but that everyone felt needed to happen. Because sometimes all someone needs is to be seen, and respected, and truly loved. The dinner that night was etched in José's memory as a milestone. Not because of the silverware shining under the light of the refined room, nor because of the taste of the food that he would never have ordered on his own, but because of the welcoming silence that filled the room. Because of the presence of someone who, despite being so different from him, looked at him with respect and sincerity. The businessman seemed more interested in listening than in speaking. His eyes were not on José's simple clothes, nor on his calloused hands, but on the story that each wrinkle told. He listened to José's sons attentively, as if each word had weight. One of them said he wanted to be a fireman. The other said he dreamed of designing beautiful houses, more beautiful than the ones his father built. José tried to maintain control. He was used to eating quickly during breaks from work, with the dirty floor under his feet. Now, he found himself sitting at a covered table, in front of someone who didn't treat him like a common bricklayer. He was suspicious, seemed out of place, almost unreal. After dessert, the boys went out to play in the lighted garden. José was alone with the businessman, and silence fell for a moment, until the man spoke. He said he didn't just want to hear a sad story. He wanted to be part of her change. José listened but didn't understand right away. He had heard beautiful words before, but they almost always ended in empty promises. He thought about the rainy days when he was out of work, on the nights when he cried softly so his children wouldn't hear. It was hard to believe. The businessman then said he wanted to invite him to a special project. It was an abandoned house, full of old memories, that he wanted to transform into a space for the community. And he wanted José to lead the renovation, not just as a bricklayer, as someone responsible for everything. The proposal sounded impossible. He had never led anything. He was always the last to speak. He always took orders, never gave them. He asked if it wouldn't be better to call someone more experienced. But the answer was direct. I don't want the most technical. I want the most genuine. The next day, José went to see the place. A forgotten house, cracked walls, fallen doors, a smell of abandonment. But he saw something there. He saw a chance to start over. He saw a project that could make his children proud of who their father was. He started the work alone. He grabbed the hammer, the cement, the broom. There was no team, only will. Each wall cleaned was a relief. Each brick laid, a piece of pain being healed. Sweat dripped not only from his tired body, but from his soul, which was beginning to breathe again. The businessman showed up almost every day. Sometimes he brought snacks, sometimes he just listened. He didn't demand deadlines. He offered to be there. And over time more workers arrived. But it was José who gave directions. He was the one who said where and how. For the first time his voice guided a project. José's children showed up in the afternoons, sat on the curb, and laughed as they watched their father work. They got their feet dirty with sand, ran between buckets, and drew on the unplastered walls. It was as if they were slowly discovering that this simple man had much more value than the world allowed them to see. People on the street began to notice the change. Someone asked who the architect was. One of the helpers answered, "It's Mr. José." And it was then that he felt something new. Respect. Validation. Not for what he owned, but for what he built with his own hands. In that ruined house, a new chapter of his story began to be written. It wasn't just about cement or renovations. It was about dignity, about being seen, about being remembered not as someone who survived, but as someone who rebuilt. Jose returned home with tired shoulders, but with a light soul. He knew that something bigger was happening, something that wasn't measured in money, but in meaning. In the third month of the renovation, the house no longer seemed abandoned. The paint was beginning to cover the marks of time, the windows were letting in the light again, and even the garden, previously overgrown with weeds, was beginning to bloom. But what flourished most there was Jose himself. He woke up early as he always did, but now with a different spirit. There was purpose in every step, in every trip to the hardware store, in every conversation with the volunteers who began to arrive uninvited. People who heard the story were moved and wanted to help. One of the helpers was a young man in his 20s, named Tiago. He had dropped out of school and had been lost for a while on the city's street corners. When he heard about the project, he showed up out of curiosity. Jose greeted him with a firm handshake and a look that said, "You have value, even if you don't know it yet." Tiago started out sweeping the floor and carrying buckets. But little by little, Jose taught him how to align bricks, mix the right cement, and measure a wall accurately. More than technique, he taught patience. He looked at the young man with the same compassion with which he always wanted to be looked at. The businessman observed everything closely. He didn't interfere, he didn't rush. He just provided support, confidence, and presence. It was as if he knew that the real transformation was not in the walls being built, but in the people being restored inside. One afternoon, a woman passed by on the sidewalk and asked when the house would open. Jose replied that there was no date yet. She said she would wait as long as it took, because there, according to her, it seemed like a place was being born that carried love in its walls. That night, Jose came home exhausted, but not tired. It was a good kind of tiredness. He sat up in bed and looked at his sleeping children. The youngest was hugging the doll he had patched up with old sewing thread. The other, with his sketchbook open on his lap, had scribbled a plan of the new house. He was moved. He thought about his wife. He thought about how happy she would have been to see her children smiling again. He thought about how, even though she was absent, she seemed present in every detail. As if God were sewing together the pieces of his life with invisible threads of grace. The next day, Jose arrived at the construction site and found a surprise. A sign had been installed on the gate. It read, "Casa Esperanza," built with calloused hands and whole hearts. It was the businessman's idea, but the name choice came from Tiago, who said that there, for the first time, he learned to believe again. Jose stood still for a few seconds, staring at those words. He felt a lump in his throat. It was just a sign, but for him it was like a diploma. An acknowledgement that life was finally giving back what suffering had tried to take away. The fame of Casa Esperanza began to spread. People from distant neighborhoods came to help, listen, donate, participate. Some brought paint, others brought bread. Many brought stories of pain and found shelter for their own wounds in the midst of the work. A reporter showed up wanting to do a story. Jose didn't want to give an interview. He said he wasn't a cameraman, that he never knew how to speak beautifully. But the businessman encouraged him. Speak from the heart like you always did. And he did. The story was short, but the emotion was intense. Donations increased. But more than that, respect increased. Jose was no longer just a silent widower. Now he was a symbol of overcoming, a respected leader, someone who had transformed pain into service and mourning into love. Little by little, other bricklayers began to seek him out. Simple men like him, who also wanted to be part of something greater than their own livelihood. People who wanted to work, yes, but also to heal wounds that the world had never seen. And Jose, with the humility he always carried, welcomed everyone with the same firm and welcoming gaze. He didn't ask about the past. He offered the present and hope. After all, that was what that house was made of now. Of new beginnings. Jose stayed awake all night. The businessman's words kept hammering at his mind. I want to show you something. Trust me. He still didn't know what that meant, but something inside him told him it was important. Not because of the promises, but because of the way it was said. No rush, no pressure, just the truth. The next day, the businessman showed up early. He was wearing a simple shirt and jeans, and was carrying a worn notebook. He asked Jose to accompany him to a small house on the outskirts. When he got there, he opened the gate, looked the bricklayer in the eye and said, "This is where I want to build something with you." It was an old, forgotten building, with peeling walls and warped windows. But there was space, land, and structure. Jose walked through the rooms in silence. He saw beyond the mold and cracks. He imagined living walls, children running around, the smell of coffee in the morning. The businessman handed him the notebook. Inside, drawings, scribbles, ideas. A project that was still undefined, but full of purpose. I thought of a place that would be more than just a shelter. A place of reconstruction. And I want you to be the one to build it, with your hands, with your story. Jose stood still for a few seconds. He took a deep breath, feeling a lump in his throat. For years, no one had asked him to dream. It was always the opposite. They asked for strength, effort, service. Now they asked for his heart. And he didn't know how to offer it again. He turned his eyes to the businessman. He tried to hide his emotion, but his voice was choked. "Why me?" The answer came firmly, without beating around the bush. "'Cause you know pain. And only those who know pain know how to lift someone off the ground." That afternoon, Jose took a tape measure and a pencil and began measuring walls. He was alive again. Each line on the paper was a step back to himself. And while his children watched him from afar, something different blossomed in their eyes. Pride. Security. Hope. In the following days, the construction became routine. But it was a sacred routine. The sound of tools mixed with conversations, memories, and even laughter. For the first time in a long time, Jose saw his children truly smile. Not the polite smile just for the sake of politeness, but the one that springs up when the soul recognizes a home. The businessman appeared frequently. Sometimes he helped. Sometimes he just listened. He wasn't there as a boss or a benefactor. He was there as someone who knew that starting over requires presence, not just resources. And that made all the difference. One morning, Jose entered one of the already plastered rooms. He leaned against the wall, looked around and allowed himself to dream further. There might be a bookshelf there. In the other room, perhaps courses for young people. A simple but welcoming dining room. Everything was beginning to take shape. And for the first time he called that place ours. Meanwhile, neighbors began to notice the movement. A man offered to donate cement. A woman brought coffee and bread. Simple people like him, but with willing hearts. It was as if that construction awakened something dormant in everyone. The desire to be a part of it. José's children helped as best they could. They painted, carried buckets, handed out tools. But more than that, they were there. Present. Connected. And José saw them blossom beneath the bricks and paint. They began to see their father not as a man broken by grief, but as the foundation of a new story. Late one afternoon, sitting on a sack of cement, José and the businessman talked in silence. One look was enough. They both knew they were building more than just walls. They were building lives. And there, in that sketch of the future, lived something bigger than the two of them. A miracle in progress lived there. The night fell with a light breeze. The improvised lights illuminated the rooms under construction. The children were already asleep. And José, alone with his hands covered in lime, looked up and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." The answer did not come in words, but in the calm beating of his own chest. He was alive. Again. And now, for the first time, it was not just for himself. It was for everyone. Time passed, and with it, the gray days began to give way to lighter mornings in José's house. The construction continued steadily, and that space that had previously been nothing but ruins now breathed life. But the most impressive thing was not the progress of the walls, but rather the rebirth of José himself. One afternoon, while he was grouting a wall at the back of the house, José saw his oldest son sitting on a pile of bricks, with a notebook open on his lap. He was writing silently, watching his father with eyes full of meaning. When José approached, the boy hid the notebook, somewhat embarrassed. José smiled, and for the first time in a long time asked, "What are you writing, son?" The answer was simple. "My part of our story." Those words stayed with him for the rest of the day. Until that moment, José had not realized how silent their pain was too. They did not talk about their mother. They no longer cried as before. But they carried everything inside, hoping that their father would resist, because if he fell, everything would collapse again. And he almost fell. But he did not fall. The businessman was still there. Sometimes he would come for coffee, other times to bring materials, and there were times when he would just stay there, listening to José's stories while he laid the blocks. It was as if he knew that the most valuable thing in that construction was not the bricks, but the words spoken between one and the other. During one of these meetings, the businessman brought a folder. Inside it were documents, more concrete plans. The project was beginning to take on a name, identity, and purpose. It would be a place of welcome, a place for widows, orphans, people in the process of starting over. And he wanted José to be the one responsible for coordinating everything. José froze. He looked at the papers and then at the man in front of him. "But I'm just a bricklayer," he said humbly. The businessman, with the serenity of someone who has seen many walls collapse, replied, "No, you are a builder of lives." These were difficult days of digestion. Jose still felt small in the face of such responsibility. Fear was strong, but something inside him was beginning to accept that perhaps, just perhaps, God had sustained him until then for this purpose. And then one night, he opened the closet where he kept his wife's few things. He took out an old photo of her with the boys when they were still small. He sat on the bed, held the frame tightly and said in a low voice, "I will continue for us. I will take this step. I don't know how, but I will." The next day, he returned to the construction site with a different outlook. He gathered his children together and told them that the project was now bigger, that they would be part of something that would help many other people. The children didn't understand everything, but they felt the importance in their father's words. And once again their eyes lit up. The neighborhood continued to get closer. Some families began to offer help with meals, others with labor. It was as if that house became a meeting point for all those who carried some hidden pain. Jose, without realizing it, became a symbol of resistance and healing. Over time, the place gained a name. New House. Simple but full of truth. A name that represented everything that was being built there, inside and outside the walls. A name that silently said that starting over is possible. In the midst of the chaos of construction, cement and children running around with paintbrushes in their hands, Jose's heart beat. He was going more firmly. He still missed her. He still had nights of deep silence. But now, those nights were accompanied by purpose. And that made all the difference. Jose's story was no longer just his. It was about the wife who left, the children who resisted, the businessman who believed, and every person who, upon seeing that man start over, began to believe too. And without realizing it, between one wall and another, he became the same for others. Someone who made others believe again. The days that followed were the most intense of Jose's life. The old routine of hard work with cement and bricks was now mixed with meetings, visits from people interested in helping, and stories that began to emerge from all sides. Simple people like him who had also lost something, someone, and who were now looking for a place to be heard. The new house, still unfinished, was already a refuge. There were days when Jose would stop everything to listen. People would come in with tears in their eyes and leave hugging each other, as if they had left behind a bit of the weight they were carrying. Jose, without a diploma, became a counselor, a friend, and a firm presence for those who had already lost everything. The businessman was still by his side, but now more behind the scenes. He would say that it was time for Jose to take the lead, to take on the mission. And Jose, despite his fear, began to do just that. Every word spoken, every decision made was done with care, thinking not only about rebuilding walls but lives. One cloudy morning, while cleaning the floor of the future reception room, Jose found a small stone, marked by a crack in the middle. He put it in his pocket, as a symbol of what they were building. Beauty even in the broken parts. Because now he knew that there is strength in the cracks. It is through them that the light enters. Jose's children were also beginning to blossom. The oldest, who had barely spoken before, was now the first to greet visitors, with a shy but dignified smile. The middle daughter, who loved to draw, painted murals on the walls of Casa Nova with bright colors and traces of hope. Even the youngest, who slept clinging to his mother's blouse, now slept peacefully, with his arms loose on the mattress. One afternoon, while they were resting on the porch, Jose turned to the businessman and asked, "Why did you choose me?" The answer was direct, without embellishments. "Because you never stopped loving, even when everything fell apart." And this phrase echoed within him as a reminder that love, even when silent, can build walls that not even time can tear down. The surrounding community began to get even more involved. A seamstress offered handmade pillows. A local baker began sending fresh bread every Sunday. A retired teacher began reading stories to children in the late afternoons. What began as a way to help a family now became a movement. Jose watched everything with teary eyes. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone. About taking a step forward even without the strength. About continuing even without understanding why. And most importantly, about transforming pain into a bridge, never a wall. On one of the most memorable nights, the first lights were turned on in the new house. There was still no furniture, nor any finishing on the walls. But there were dozens of people gathered, sitting on the floor, smiling at each other. For the first time since his wife's death, Jose didn't feel empty. He felt peace. As the wind blew through the open windows, someone suggested that he say a few words. Jose hesitated. He looked at his children, then at the picture of his wife that he had hung on the wall. He took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. This house was built with more than cement. It was built with tears, with memories, with faith. Each wall has a story, and each story a reason to continue. Here no one is alone. Here, pain will not have the last word. The silence that followed was broken only by the restrained applause. People who cried without shame. People who understood. People who knew what it meant to try to start over with their hearts still full of longing. And at that moment Jose knew. He was living his purpose. The tragedy that almost destroyed him now served to rebuild so many others. And the love he thought he had lost was more alive than ever, spread throughout every corner of that house, kept in the smile of every life touched. The morning after the symbolic inauguration of the new house, Jose woke up early. The sun had not yet fully risen, but the sky was already tinged with shades of hope. He got up silently, walked through the house and stopped in front of his wife's portrait. He stood there for long minutes, as if talking to her through the calm gaze of the photograph. Outside, life was beginning again. Children played in the improvised backyard. Neighbors swept the sidewalk and the smell of coffee filled the air. It was a new kind of daily life. There was no luxury, but there was dignity. There was purpose. And that was enough. The businessman arrived shortly after, with 2 cups of coffee in his hands. They were together once again, but now in a different kind of silence. A silence of gratitude. They sat on the front steps, watching the calm movement of the morning. Jose broke the silence with a simple sentence. "I thought life was over. But it was just beginning in a different way." The friend smiled, and this time it was he who was moved. It wasn't just about donations, nor about social projects. It was about transformation. About what money can't buy. Jose had found strength where there was only pain. He had given meaning to loss. And now he was giving hope back to the world. That afternoon, A white-haired lady came to the house with a piece of paper in her hands. It was a handwritten note, saying that she had lost her son years ago and who had been unable to trust anyone since then. But when she heard José's story, something in her opened up again. She wanted to help. She wanted to listen. She wanted to be a part of it. Other stories began to emerge. A young man who had thought about giving up on life, but when he visited Casa Nova, he felt that there was still a place for him in the world. A single mother who found a support network there to take care of her children. A man who offered to teach carpentry to the teenagers in the neighborhood. The pain of each person was stitched together by the courage of the other. José became a bridge. A link between worlds that normally do not cross. He knew how to listen without judging. He knew how to keep quiet when necessary. And when he spoke, his words came from the truest place. From the depths of his soul, where longing lives and hope blossoms. The nights at Casa Nova began to be lit by more than lamps. They were lit by stories. By songs of gratitude. By prayers said in silence. The absence of his wife still hurt, but now that pain had a direction. José transformed it into service, into dedication, into comfort for others. One day, as he walked to the back of the property, he saw his youngest son playing with other children. For the first time, his eyes were not lost nor his face downcast. He ran, laughed loudly, called out to his colleagues. That was more than a relief. It was a cure. José felt the tears flow without shame. He knew. He was managing to take care of what was left. The businessman, in turn, began to bring other friends. People who had never set foot in the outskirts of the city now sat down to listen to stories of people who had not been kind to life. And the magic happened there, in the encounter between distant realities that finally looked each other in the eye. There was no longer any doubt. All of this had surpassed all expectations. The house that had started as a shelter for a broken family was now a beacon. A place where pain was welcomed but not fed. Where hope was small but constant, like a candle that insisted on not going out. José, silently, understood that all of this was an answer. An answer that he would never have foreseen, but that now made sense. Sadness had not taken his life. It had shown him another path. A path made of surrender, faith, and love for those who are still here. As the sky grew dark that late afternoon, and the lights of Casa Nova were turned on one by one, José went up to the roof to look at the horizon. He took a deep breath. Down there was life, there was healing, there was a new beginning. And above, he knew, someone was looking at him with pride. Time passed. Not much, but enough to transform scars into marks of overcoming. Casa Nova was no longer just the home of José and his children. It was a meeting place, a silent shelter for the weary, a place where hope was nourished every day with the simple but true things that life brought. José became someone that many sought after, not for status nor for fame, but because there was something rare about him. He knew how to listen with his heart. He knew how to look at the pain of others without looking away. He had been hurt, and because of that, he was now able to see the wounds of the world with more compassion. The businessman was still present, but now he came as part of the family. He sat at the table, ate warm bread with margarine, and laughed at the stories told at the end of the day. And every time he looked at José, He understood better why that man had changed his own life too. Yes, because this story was not about a rich man helping a poor man. It was about an encounter. Two men from different worlds, who recognized each other in their pain and in their desire to do something about it. Money served as a bridge. But what sustained this crossing was the love, respect, and faith that grew between them. A year after that first conversation at the gate, Jose organized a small celebration. There was no band or fireworks, just an out-of-tune guitar, a simple cake, and a single candle in the center of the table. He looked at those who were there, at the faces that knew the struggle and still smiled. And then he spoke. He said that he didn't have answers for everything, that he still missed everyone every day. But now he also felt a purpose. That the pain he thought would kill him was, in fact, what made him reborn. He said he would never be the same man again, and that he was grateful for that. 'Cause now he loved more. He forgave more. And he lived more slowly with more presence. His children were there, steady. The oldest was starting to work alongside his father on small projects. The youngest already dreamed of being an architect. And the middle child, who had barely spoken before, now led the reading circles for the children in the community. They too had been reborn. Life was not perfect. There were still bills, hard days, illnesses, and longing. But there was also courage. And the kind of peace that only those who have faced the worst know. That silent certainty that, even if everything falls apart again, there is something inside that will not break anymore. That day after the party, Jose walked to the backyard, where he had planted a tree sapling in the first month in the new house. It was growing strong. He touched the thin trunk with his fingertips and whispered, "You will resist too." It was like talking to himself. Like confirming that yes, he was ready for whatever came his way. The businessman, watching from afar, understood. This was no longer about charity. It was about legacy. About planting, waiting, caring. And then watching it blossom, even if slowly. Shortly after, Jose received an invitation to speak at a school in the region. He didn't know if he could do it. He said he had no education, that he had never liked the stage. But he accepted. And that day, in front of dozens of teenagers, he told his story. His voice was choked up with long pauses but with truth. And when he finished, there was no loud applause. There was silence. A silence full of impact. He was no longer just a widowed bricklayer. He was a living testament to the fact that new beginnings exist. That there is beauty after loss. That life can, indeed, surprise you when you least expect it. And as the sun set on that last scene, Jose returned home, where dinner was waiting for him, prepared by his children. He sat at the table, thanked them quietly, and looked around. What filled that space was love. Love built brick by brick, gesture by gesture. Jose's story did not end there. But there it was complete. Not as an end, but as a promise that every life, no matter how broken, can still flourish. All someone has to do is believe. And stay. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel right now to follow other real stories that transform, inspire, and remind us of what really matters. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and help spread this message. Because when you get involved, you are also part of this chain of love and new beginnings.